Good morning to this presentation on Saskatchewan Polytechnic Employee Engagement Survey. What I'm going to do over the next half hour or so is really walk you through the process, how it's going to work. And on your screen, you should have a questions box. So I'm going to try to unmute you towards the end. We've been having some audio difficulties on our end, so I apologize for that in advance. I'll try to unmute you at the end so you can ask questions, but if that doesn't work, just simply enter a question into the questions box that you see as part of your dashboard, and then we'll get going. So before I begin with the actual survey, I'd like to just give you some reassurance as to who is behind this. So just a little bit about TALENTMAP, who we are. We've been doing employee engagement for actually it's closer to 20 years in business now. We started in the late 90s, and TALENTMAP is essentially an engagement workforce survey and employee engagement firm. So the large proportion of our business, 90% plus, is solely around employee engagement. We do some other types of surveys such as onboarding, exit, 360, safety, culture, things like that, but primarily we are in the employee engagement and only in the employee engagement business. We don't conduct other HR activities such as compensation and benefits. We don't use our employee engagement surveys as feeders or as teasers for some of those other services as others do. And given the number of surveys that we conduct on an annual basis and then compounded over the better part of 20 years now, we've amassed a very, very sizable database in many, many different sectors. So I'll show you some of the clients that are in there on the next slide. Just before I go there, I mean, apart from the employee engagement surveys, we also engage a lot in the post-survey process, so helping our clients improve engagement through workshops, through focus groups, through leadership training and coaching. Those are things that Barb and I do specifically, and myself specifically. I'll be the one who, after the survey is completed, I'll be the one who will be presenting the survey to you, spending some time out in Saskatoon in January to present to a number of different groups as well. So, as I said before, we do surveys in many, many different sectors. We're very active in a number of sectors, including public sector, the association. We're also very active in the education, although that's not necessarily depicted on this slide. We have recently done a number of colleges and universities, and so we are very, very attuned, or I'm very, very attuned in terms of some of the idiosyncrasies that come in a college environment, such as dealing and surveying faculty, for example. That tends to be a little bit different than the standard employee survey as dealing with faculty. I'm sure you must know does take a special hand, a deft hand, at doing this. So there are idiosyncrasies in there. We've done a lot of work in education, both post-secondary education, both at the college and the university level. And all of those are contained within our benchmarks as well. So what I want to talk about really today is I'm going to start with talking about really employee engagement, what it is, what it's not, how it's different from things like job satisfaction that we've been measuring over the last number of years. It's really turned to employee engagement. Why do we do it? How do we do it? How we're measuring engagement? Essentially, how we derive the questions and the models that will be behind the survey. And then we'll talk a little bit about how the survey is actually going to work. We'll walk you through our process. And then I'm going to spend some time on the reporting. So what you can expect to see and when the data is compiled and how it will be presented. So we'll walk you through a number of report slides, and then we'll talk about next steps. I figure this whole process should take around 30 minutes or so. So first of all, what is employee engagement? What are we actually talking about? Here's a quote from David Zinger, who, if you follow employee engagement on the bulletin boards and on the LinkedIn profiles and chat rooms. David Zinger's out of Winnipeg, and he's very, very quite well known in Canada as an employee engagement expert. And he basically says it's good work done with others. And when it boils down to it, There's a lot of literature around engagement, but some of the concepts behind it are actually very, very simple. Simple to understand, yet complex in terms of implementing and improving it. So when we're doing engagement at TALENTMAP, we use a model called head, heart, and hands. And basically where it goes to is we focus on the behavioral aspects of employee engagement. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you see the hands portion. And we focus on those behaviors is because that is what's visible to others. What's in the head and what's in the heart we can measure, we do measure, and we will measure as part of this process. But what is visible to others on a day-to-day basis are those behaviors. So how then do engaged employees behave differently than those who are less engaged or not engaged? The major difference is the engaged employee puts in extra effort. These are the folks that take initiative. These are the folks that go the extra mile. They promote the organization to others. They collaborate well. They work well in teams. They're generally in a good spirit and good humor. Not all the time. Nobody is. But basically, you know, engaged employees are going the extra mile. They are putting extra effort. They're more emotionally invested in their work. And of course, to get to that state, they have to be of a certain mindset and have certain feelings, and there also has to be an environment that precludes that behavior. So, and that's where we get to the head and the heart. So there's two components to that underlying behavior. The first is the head, or a rational component. So when we're at any job, when we're in any employment situation, we ask ourselves, everybody does this, we ask ourselves on a semi-regular basis, does it make sense for me to work here? Is this something that I want to be doing? And we evaluate that through very rational criteria. For example, compensation. Am I paid enough? Am I paid fairly? Performance feedback tends to be another one. Am I getting good feedback on my work? The work environment. You know, do I like the space where I work? Is it conducive to doing good work? So very rational considerations. And there's a number of those. But really where the game is played is on the emotional side. So the heart. And there's one word in particular on this slide, and I'll circle it here. Give me a second. We take the pen and we circle that word, care. And really what this is all about is everybody evaluating, not consciously, often subconsciously or semi-consciously, the degree to which they feel that the organization cares about their own well-being as individuals. And when you talk to someone who's not engaged or who's less engaged or who's leaving the organization because they're disenchanted, often what you'll hear is, well, you know what, they don't give a crap about me. They don't care about me. And really that's what it boils down to. It's that conclusion that gets the employee to disengage. And of course the converse is very true. If an employee, the organization they work for cares about them as an individual, that lays the foundation along with the rational considerations for engagement. It's not just about that, and it's more complex than that, but fundamentally what we're looking for as employees in any organization is the organization that we work for to show that they care, to demonstrate that they care. Now, one of the things about engagement that is so difficult, complex, the concept itself should be pretty simple, but what's difficult about it is to demonstrate that caring when we're dealing with a large number of other priorities. And of course, managers manage a number of different portfolios, whether finance or marketing, administration, faculty, things. We manage different things, but we manage engagement very, very differently than the rest. Many managers don't know how to make that difference. And because of that, it's much more difficult to manage engagement. And employee engagement is not something we can tell somebody to do or to be, like we would tell them to do something or task them to do a sort of specific job. You cannot do that with employee engagement. This is a set of feelings that has to come, and employees are only going to engage in those behaviors that I spoke about because they want to, not because they're told to or have to, and that's much more difficult to achieve. So, but it can be done. We wouldn't be in business if it couldn't be done. So how is it done then? We have a number for, first of all, in terms of the measurement and the model. The way it works is the head and the heart aspects in an organizational context essentially take the form of what we call dimensions, and you see that on the left-hand side of your screen. There's a number of workplace dimensions that condition those feelings and those attitudes: compensation, work environment, performance feedback, all in the first column. You don't need to read them. Each of these will have some influence on one's level of engagement. But every organization will have this full list. What's going to be important or much more important to every organization is going to be 2 or 3 of these things, these dimensions that we're going to identify and call drivers of engagement. And I'll explain that a little bit later on. But we start with the full list. And if we're doing the right things right as an organization, if we're doing well on those themes, those dimensions that are highly valued by individuals, then more and more are going to feel the engaged attitudes, the pride, the optimism, the determination, the resilience that you see, all listed in the second column. Of course, that's not an exhaustive list. However, these are the attitudes that then, when someone holds these attitudes and more, that's when they engage in the engagement behaviors. They go the extra mile, they're collaborative, they take initiative, etc. They're doing these things now because they want to, because they feel those attitudes in the second column. And of course, when you have an entire organization or close to an entire organization all engaging in these behaviors where all of the individuals are doing these things, you cannot help but improve the organization as a result, because the organization is the sum of its individuals, and it's greater than that sum. And when we do, the research clearly shows that there's a strong empirical link between those attitudes that we're talking about, the level of employee engagement, and business results. The students, the success of students, the experience of the students, maximizing student success, providing skilled graduates to meet labor market needs. That's what it's all about for Saskatchewan Polytechnic. This is what engagement is going to do for you, or a higher level of engagement is going to do for you. Of course, the research also shows that it's going to improve safety culture. It's going to improve productivity, attendance, retention, public confidence. There's essentially 15 to 20 years of research that empirically backs all this. And of course, I'm not going to read this slide through, but it points to a number of studies that show those empirical links. And if anybody's interested, I can point you to a number of papers that we've done, a number of research compilations, literature searches that all go and show those empirical links very, very clearly. I also wanted to sort of dispel a myth around employee engagement. Many people, when we were exposed to it for the first time, been around for a while, they say, oh, you know what, employee engagement, it's just the latest buzzword, it's just a way to get us working harder. You know, before it used to be job satisfaction, and before that it was total quality, and this is the latest consulting buzzword of the decade. In actual fact, that's false, because we used to measure job satisfaction. We used to measure employee satisfaction, with the theory being that satisfied employees would then be more productive, more engaged. But the research showed that that wasn't the case. Satisfaction is not the same as engagement. A satisfied employee essentially is content, is gratiated, and feels that their employee needs are met. And the focus has always been, or always was, on essentially providing the employees or meeting the employees' needs. Of course, how do you do that? Well, first of all, you would ask what those needs are. And then when you do that, when you ask employees what their needs are, inevitably, invariably, what they're going to answer you is what was in the head component of the head, heart, hands model. I want more money. I want a better workspace. I want less hours. I want the rational things that make the working conditions easier will satisfy the employee. But what they will not do is they will not engage the employee. They will not bring the employee to a level of emotional investment that's going to spur on the behavioral aspects of engagement. And that's what an engaged employee does. And essentially that engagement is resulted from those attitudes that I showed you before, the pride, the optimism, the emotional investment. And that brings the employee to a different level. Now the focus is no longer on what the employee gets, but having the employee desire to give back, creating an environment where the employee wants to give back. So it's very, very different concepts here. To be engaged, most employees need to be satisfied, but you don't need to be satisfied to be engaged. That's almost an oxymoron when you think about it, but that's actually the case. You can be engaged without being satisfied. And a good example of that is we see is a large, many engaged employees and clients that we work with elsewhere are not satisfied with work-life balance, or they're not satisfied with compensation. We see that often in the not-for-profit world. They're making trade-offs and sacrifices on things that would make them ingratiated or content because they're engaged or emotionally invested and have that purpose that drives them to give more or give back to the organization. So satisfaction and engagement they're not the same concept, and we're going to be focusing on employee engagement. So then once we understand what it is we're after, how then do we go about measuring it? And essentially we're in the process of working with SAS Polytechnic SPT to develop a questionnaire. It's almost finished, almost finalized. And what we're doing is we're actually going to use this instrument to measure and answer 4 questions, which are on the top of your screen. The first, obviously, is how engaged are the employees at SPT. And that's the top of, this is sort of the pinnacle of this pyramid here. But knowing how many people are engaged or how engaged the employees are is of little use until we know how to influence that level so we can improve it. And we influence that level by understanding how people feel about the different dimensions, what attitudes do employees hold towards the different dimensions that influence that engagement. So in the pyramid, you see all of the things that you saw in the 4-column chart on the left-hand side: innovation, customer focus, work-life balance, etc. We're adding to as well, actually it's carryover from your previous survey, diversity, culture, and values, and staffing. So we're going to measure those as well. Anybody who might be familiar or vaguely familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs in psychology might recognize the fact that this is similar to Maslow in one respect. Maslow's hierarchy of needs asserts that every human being has to meet a set of needs before they can meet the next set, and it's a hierarchy. So first we have a basic set of physical needs that need to be met: food, clothing, shelter, etc. Second, there's a needs for security. Third, there's needs for self-esteem. And it's very similar in engagement. First, we have a management foundation that has to be in place before anything else can happen. And then we need to meet the rational needs: the compensation, the work environment, the performance feedback. And then and only then will we progress to meeting more emotive needs, those emotional caring needs that we talked about earlier on. So we're going to measure how effective the organization is at meeting those needs. And then we're also going to take that a step further. We're going to identify which of these dimensions are actually having a disproportionate impact on the level of engagement. Because not everything is going to be the same, and this is where SPT is going to be unique. There's going to be 3 or 4 of these that are going to be much more important than the rest. And that's really where we're going to see that we need to focus our workplace improvements, rather than trying to identify and address all of the issues in all of these boxes, which for any organization is daunting, close to impossible. We're going to identify 3 or 4 of these, and that we're going to focus intensely on those. What they are now, I can't tell you. I can tell you some of the more common ones tend to be the vision of the organization, the leadership, professional growth, but there's no guarantee that that's going to be the case for SPT. We'll know that once we measure. And so then we measure essentially the engagement attitudes. So we're asking, the questionnaire is going to take the form of a number of attitudes broken out into each dimension. So the engagement dimension here, you can see the actual questions, and everything is done on a Likert agreement scale. So you can see what we're actually doing is we're measuring the degree to which people hold those engaged attitudes that I pointed out before. Am I proud? Am I optimistic? Am I inspired? Would I recommend the organization to a friend? Do I get a sense of personal accomplishment? We also ask a number of specific questions to SPT. Do I have a sense of commitment? Can I make a difference? Am I motivated? So those will augment the basic 6 attitudes that we measure here at the top. Well, obviously we'll adjust the lettering to make sure that it starts with A, but nonetheless we measure these top 6 and we've added the 3 to it. That's going to provide a measure of engagement. So what basically happens is we're going to compile the percentage of folks who agree with those statements and state that as a percentage of engagement in the organization. And then we're going to compare SPT to other educational institutions. Like I said before, we've done many. We've got around 2,500 employees who've answered a very, very similar questionnaire that we can compare to. And then we're going to put the results in comparison to that to see how SPT is comparing to this academic or educational institution benchmark. Of course, you have a number of other benchmarks that are listed here. Obviously, that's just to show the breadth of our benchmark capability, but really what we're going to focus on is this academic benchmark. So how is this actually going to work? What's going to happen in the next few weeks and months? So what we're doing here, what we're in the midst of doing, is what we call our 7-step process. And we're actually in step 1, where we're preparing, essentially deploy the survey. So we've had a number of meetings with the HR folks, with Betty McWeary and her team. And we've been in development of the questionnaire. So what we've been doing is taking TALENTMAP'S standard, tested, validated instrument that is used to measure engagement, and we've been customizing it to meet the specific needs of SPT. As one of the roles that you and others are going to be asked to play in the following days and weeks is to get the message out, because essentially the response to the survey is only going to be as good as the communications around it that are going to take place. And what we do at TALENTMAP is we provide a good deal of assistance in the form of message templates, posters, FAQs, all of those types of things. We're going to send a number of templates around for messaging before the survey, so to alert people that the survey will be coming on a certain date, to let them know that, we're going to talk about the confidentiality, which I'll address in a few minutes. Basically prepare folks for the actual date of deployment. But the formal messaging is only part of this. What usually happens in most organizations is people are going to start, sort of the informal conversation, the water cooler conversation. Is this legit? Are people going to see my answers? And this is where we're asking you folks to play a role. Essentially to peel back the onion on everything I'm telling you, and to reassure people that yes, this is a good initiative. You need to fill this out, because it's going to result in improving our measuring and improving our overall engagement. It's a good thing to do. And so it's that reassurance that people are going to be looking for, as the communications goes out. And then we're going to deploy. And deployment basically consists of sending out a message from TALENTMAP, from our servers, with a URL, a link, that's going to bring people directly to our servers. And it's not going to be in the SPT environment. It's going to bring the respondent outside the SPT environment to a TALENTMAP server, where they're going to respond to the questionnaire, and the data will be maintained outside SPT on TALENTMAP servers that are here in Canada. So there's no crossing of boundaries of data and all that stuff. So the deployment, the survey will be open for a couple of weeks, after which we'll close, and that's when we take over. We clean the data to make sure there's no errors, it's logically consistent. We prepare the report that I'm about to show you, and then we embark on our presentations. And then, of course, the real work begins at that point. Once we start the presentation process, that's when essentially the discussions on SPT then need to take place in terms of, okay, what do we do with this data? Of course, we're going to provide support with that in terms of telling you what the information, what the survey is saying, what the survey means. We're going to provide direction in terms of what is it we need to do with that, and then it's up to SPT to essentially to work in groups to devise a series of action plans to improve employee engagement. Of course, in these boxes, you can see where you can obtain TALENTMAP support in doing all of that. So I'm going to show you now what's involved in the reporting. So in terms of confidentiality, this is key. This is quite a number of questions you're going to need on this. And the first thing to understand is that the data will be held, the survey responses will be held outside the SPT environment. And they're going to be on TALENTMAP surveys, meaning that we have sole control over who sees what. That's the first thing to understand. So nobody at SPT will be able to go into the data and see any individual responses whatsoever. So the way we protect individuals' anonymity is we're not going to provide any reporting, any information for any group of individuals that's fewer than 5. So if there's a faculty group, or if there's an admin group or a support group where there's 3 people and the manager wants to see results for those 3 people, we're basically going to have to draw the line at 5 and say, no, you're going to have to combine those with some other group. Those people will still be counted in the aggregate results for sure, but we will not be able to provide those individual results. And now, there's also an online reporting tool which you'll be able to access directly, at least through Betty. She'll have the key to this tool, and essentially what it will do is it will allow you to look at the results by the different breaks that were identified in the upcoming process. But still, if we try to narrow it down to any group of fewer than 5, well, let's say, okay, I want to look at the faculty of engineering. I want to look at women who have blonde hair and blue eyes, and there's 3 of them. You'll get an error message. Participants will have access denied. I was just basically using a hypothetical. We're not actually collecting information on hair color and eyes, if you didn't already realize that. So just wanted to make sure. Okay, so that's confidentiality. So in terms of the reporting, there's 3 major types. There's what we call an overall executive report, and then there's what's called individual manager reports, or we also refer to them as snapshot reports. And then there's the online reporting that I just mentioned, where you will have direct access to the database, but not the individual data. You'll be able to run different cuts for groups, but the groups have to be greater than 5. So there's 3 levels of reporting. So this is what it's going to basically look like. So what I'm showing you here is an excerpt from the executive report. So the executive report is going to contain information for the entire organization, so the entire SPT. And what you see here is the format that most of the reporting is going to be done by. So you've got overall engagement. What that is, essentially, we ask, if you remember the questionnaire excerpt I showed you before, there was 5 points on the scale, and the favorable, what's in green here, are the percentage of folks who answered agree or strongly agree to each of the questions. So I'm proud to tell others I work for my organization. 79% agreed or strongly agreed with that statement organization-wide. 16% were neutral and neither agree nor disagree. 5% were disagreed or strongly disagreed. And then for the overall engagement score, it's going to be the simple average of the 6 favorable, neutral, and unfavorable percentage scores that you see here. We're going to compare your previous period, so the last survey that you did, where we have an identical or very similar question. So you'll see how you've changed. So what you're going to see is the differential between the favorable this time and the favorable in the previous period. So this would say you've gone down 3 points, which would mean in the previous period it was 74% and now it's 71%. And then we're going to also compare you to how you compare to that benchmark, that academic benchmark that we showed you before. And in this case, this organization's 5 points below the benchmark. So it gives you very, very quickly the overall snapshot, how we've done since the last survey, and how we're doing against the benchmark. And then we're also going to show you how you do on each of those pyramid boxes, the themes. So these are actually aggregates themselves. So under each of these themes are a number of attitude questions. So for work environment, for example, there's going to be questions like, I like the space where I work, I get the training that I need, I have the tools and equipment that I need. And again, you see the percentage of folks, average percent who are favorable, neutral, and unfavorable on that series of questions, how that compares to the previous period, how that compares to the benchmark, and then we rank order them. And we're also going to show you what's called a heat map. So this is one of the, in the executive report, where we're going to break it down a little bit. We're going to identify what breaks are coming in the overall reporting process at the beginning. But this is an example where we're going to look at the different departments, and you're going to see how each department compares to the overall on all of those dimensions. So what you see here, these numbers represent the overall favorable for each of those dimensions that I showed you here. So if you look at compensation, in this case it's 40, so the slides don't match up. The compensation, so that number 40 would be in here in the SPT report, and then you would see for each department whether or not it's above or below that overall organization average. So Department 2 would be below average, and then it's color-coded. So the more it's going orange, the more below averages, the more green, the more above average. So you can see very, very quickly, Department 4 is well above average on most, Department 3 well below average, and so you can get a quick heat map or snapshot of how each department is doing. And a couple of slides that are probably the most important. Remember I said we're going to need to understand where we need to focus. What are the right things that we need to do right? So what we do is something called relative weight. And relative weight assesses for each dimension the level of influence that that dimension has on engagement. For those of you who are more statistically inclined, it works based on correlation and regression. I'm not going to get into the math on this right now. But what you can see is, as an output, it will show you in percentage terms how much of engagement is accounted for by each of the dimensions. So you can clearly see in this particular example, professional growth, leadership, and the immediate manager have a much more important role to play in influencing engagement than things like work-life balance or communication. And that will guide us, because that will say, okay, we need to understand those top things. They're going to have a much bigger impact on engagement than anything else, so we can focus on that and understanding that. So you can see, narrowing down the long list of dimensions, we're going to identify those top three. So whatever it happens to be, professional growth, innovation, vision, in this case, professional growth, senior leadership, or immediate management. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do what's called a quadrant map. And the quadrant map identifies for you how we're doing on each of those dimensions, and it also plots which of those are more important. So what we're actually looking for are essentially the dimensions that are going to be on the right-hand side and where we're seen by our employees as needing improvement. So the bottom right-hand quadrant here are essentially going to identify for us those opportunities for improvement. So if we look at this particular example, we would see professional growth and innovation are not rated that highly, especially compared to the benchmark, which is the horizontal line, by our organization, by our employees, but yet they're the strongest influencers or drivers of engagement. So that really isolates for us where we need to focus our attention. Then we're going to drill down into each of those dimensions on an attitude-by-attitude basis. And you can see, so for each dimension, professional growth, for example, what are the statements, the attitudes that comprise it, how people answered it, whether they are agreement or favorable, neutral, or in disagreement with each of the attitudes, and then we can see where we have, where we can improve. And then we take that a step further and we look at verbatim comments. In the questionnaire, under each of these dimensions, people are going to have the opportunity to isolate or identify improvements. So under professional growth, after they answer the agreement scales for these 5 issues, it's going to ask them, the questionnaire will ask them, how could professional growth be improved at SPT, where there's an open text answer. And then that open text will provide us with a lot of information and insight as to why individuals feel, or more individuals feel in this example, that there's not enough opportunities for continuous learning, or their career aspirations, they're not sure that they can be achieved at the organization. And that really provides us a lot of insight. And then what we'll show you are a number of quotes of those verbatim comments that are going to really illustrate what's going on, and also provide the real themes in those quotations, in those comments, to really understand what's going on with a dimension called professional growth, which is a very important driver of engagement. And so when we go through this for the key drivers, we're going to really have a good understanding as to what's influencing engagement, what the root causes are, and of course we're going to be able to bring it all together into a summary of key insights at the organizational level at the end of the presentation. And of course, most importantly, provide direction. What is it you need to keep doing? What is it you need to improve on? What are other organizations doing that are helping them do that? Because of course we have a lot of experience to draw on that will be able to do it for you. So essentially, that's what's going to happen in terms of the survey. You can see the process, you can see the reporting. What we're doing now is we're in the final stages of the questionnaire. Of course, the pre-survey, the communication is going to take place in the coming days, and as well as is the deployment. So on that note, I'm going to stop and see if you have any questions. I'm just going to open my questions box to see if anybody has any questions, and I'll try to unmute everybody. Let's see here. If you have a question to ask, I'd be more than happy to take it.
Thanks very much. It's Terrence. I do have a. Sorry, can you hear me first?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. Just a couple quick questions, and thank you for taking us through that webinar here this morning, and look forward to meeting you in person. I think you had mentioned you were the one coming out to do our campus presentation.
I certainly am. Yes.
Perfect. One of the questions I know we're going to get asked, and you made some comments to it earlier in the presentation on the one slide that has the other participating organizations. Are you at liberty, I guess, to share with us just some of the school names that would be included in the post-secondary education sector?
Absolutely.
We often get questions on some of the external benchmarks for that. So
yeah. So on the college side, the names off the top of my head: Northern Lights College, that's Dalton Creek, BC; St. Lawrence College in Kingston, Ontario; Cambrian College in Sudbury, Ontario; Langara in Vancouver. Those are, I'm just rhyming some off the top of my head. And on the university side, there's Concordia University, there's McMaster University, there's Athabasca in Alberta, there's MacEwan as well. That's in Edmonton, and there's more. And the benchmark's roughly around 15, 20 different institutions.
Okay. Yeah, and it would be good if there's a couple in there that we belong to Polytechnics Canada, and there's a number of us across with quite a few in Ontario. Actually, I think there's 6 in total in Ontario. So it'd be good if we can at least note a couple of those. But some of those that you've mentioned certainly are good to have in there.
Good. Okay.
My second question, and I'm not sure how much information Betty shared with you at this point. In our previous surveys, we've had some challenges and a number of different methods in terms of dealing with demographic information going into it. And this is going to be kind of our pivotal year now, based on some decisions we've made to move forward with providing you guys the demographic information in the background without having it on the survey. And we even went to the extent last year of it being on an optional rather than a formalized requirement. Any suggestion or tips, I guess, in the communication piece of that, of transitioning? We know about we can present the information regarding the confidentiality and that the information only resides with yourself. But any experience that you've had with other institutions of dealing with some of those concerns?
Yeah, absolutely. The key here is to be transparent in terms of letting people know that you'll be transferring a number of employee characteristics to us for compilation purposes only. We've got some text, I think, that Barb can provide if she hasn't already around that. And when people see, yeah, okay, well, you know, they're talking about my length of service in my department, that makes sense, right? And it's, you know, it's simply to shorten the questionnaire. Basically, that, you know, why ask people information that we've already got? So, and of course, it also makes the compilation a lot easier to do. So, you know, in a couple of sentences in some of that pre-survey communication, of course, there's going to be, you know, there's going to be questions about, okay, well, are you going to be able to cross-tabulate the fact that I'm in Department A and I've only been 5 years here, and to isolate? And the answer is no. What happens on our end, TalentMap, is essentially as soon as someone completes the survey, the identifying information is dropped from the database. So we obviously have an email so we can reach the person, but once that person completes the survey, the email is replaced by a unique identifier as a number. So we don't know who that person is anymore. We just have that record is identified by a number. So.
Well, that's good, and I think those details are important for us, and it's,
yeah,
it's
exactly.
certainly we were planning on being transparent with everything, but the more information we can provide, the better.
Yeah, exactly. Any other questions? There might be some others, and of course, the session has been recorded, and we're going to we'll do a little bit of editing and transfer that over to you, Betty, in the next couple of days or so. So you'll be able to post that on your internet site, and any questions can come directly to me. My coordinates are on the screen there, or they can go to Barb Pierce, our project manager on this. So we'd be more than happy to entertain. We understand very, very clearly, you know, what concerns that some people have in doing these surveys, because let's face it, a lot of us have had bad experiences with them. So, you know, when we're doing this, especially when we're doing this with a client for the first time, we want to bend over backwards to make sure that people feel at ease that their information is going to be extremely well protected and put to good use.
Sorry, I did have one follow-up question just in relation to the demographics piece.
Sure.
I mentioned that we had made it optional last year for the demographics, mainly with the intent of trying to increase our participation rate. Do you have any stats, I guess, on what your average participation rates are, or what would be kind of a benchmark of the higher? And we have literature, obviously, that would show that, but it would be good to have an idea from your other participants in the trend market data.
Yeah. In the benchmark data in the academic institutions, the response rates range from about 60 to 70%. 70, 75. So the high end is around 75. Some of the smaller institutions can get up to 80. The issue becomes, of course, that's not evenly distributed between the different groups. So faculty is a tougher slog. Response rates do tend to be lower. And the primary reason for that is part-time faculty just don't feel that that's something that they need to do, notwithstanding the communications and things like that. You know, we try in the communications to impress on everybody that, you know, we really need their opinion, but that, you know, that's historically been it's historically been a challenge, especially with part-time faculty. Some institutions include student employees as well. Student employees tend to have a little bit lower response rate as well, only because they're transients, right? They don't feel a long-term investment in the institution from an employment perspective. So there's those dynamics going on. But the response rates tend to be very high in admin and support and management, well over 80% in most cases. So.
Okay, thank you.
If there's no other questions, then I will take my leave, sign off, close the recording. Thank you very, very much for your time this morning. Okay, my pleasure. Of course, you've got the coordinates here. So,
awesome.
Betty, did you have something to add?
No, nothing to add. That was very well done.
Thank you very much. Have a good day, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.